The grand estate stood like a monument to wealth, its polished marble floors and glimmering crystal chandeliers casting a hollow brilliance. Every corner of the house whispered tales of opulence, yet for Eleanor Harper, it was a gilded prison. Married into a family that valued appearances above all else, Eleanor's days were an endless blur of servitude and silence. Her husband, Gregory, a man with a polished smile but an empty heart, and her mother-in-law, Celeste, a woman who wore kindness like a mask, often left her behind under the guise of family duty. When Gregory and Celeste departed for their luxurious trip to Paris, Eleanor was once again entrusted with caring for her father-in-law, Victor Harper, a once powerful tycoon who now uses a wheelchair and the fading embers of his life. The weight of the mansion bore down on her, its echoing halls amplifying her isolation. "Paris isn't going anywhere," Gregory had said with a dismissive chuckle that morning, leaving Eleanor with a soft kiss on the cheek and a reminder of her place. But something felt different this time beneath the surface of routine and resignation. Eleanor couldn't shake the strange intensity in Victor's gaze as he watched the car pull away. His usual vacant expression was replaced with something sharper, something alive. It was as though he had been waiting for this moment. Eleanor's unease deepened as the heavy gates of the estate closed behind her family. The grandeur that surrounded her seemed to mock her sacrifices. She moved through the house, her footsteps soft against the hardwood floors, wondering if this would be just another chapter in her life of quiet endurance, or if the cracks she sensed beneath the surface would finally split wide open. What secrets did this household have, and why did Victor's eyes gleam with a knowing light? Eleanor couldn't yet fathom that the truth would shatter everything she thought she knew about the Harpers and herself. But for now, the silence of the mansion was deafening, an ominous prelude to the storm that was about to unfold. Eleanor walked through the grand hallway, her hands brushing against the smooth, cold surface of the marble banister. The mansion was silent, save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, marking each passing second of her solitude. It wasn't the first time she had been left behind to care for Victor, but this time felt heavier, like a storm cloud had settled over her, its tension growing with each moment. Victor sat in his usual armchair in the sitting room, his frail frame dwarfed by the chair's high back. His eyes were fixed on the garden beyond the large bay window, but there was something different about him today. Eleanor noticed how his fingers tapped the armrest, a subtle rhythm that broke his usual stillness. She approached carefully, her voice gentle. "Are you comfortable, Victor? Would you like me to adjust the blanket?" she asked, trying to fill the silence with some semblance of normalcy. Victor turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting hers. For the first time in months, he seemed present and aware. His lips curled into a faint, enigmatic smile that shivered down her spine. "You're very attentive, Eleanor." "Always have been," he said, his voice quiet but deliberate. She blinked, surprised. It wasn't the words themselves but the tone, a recognition, almost like gratitude, but with something unspoken lurking beneath it. Before she could respond, he turned his attention back to the garden, leaving her standing there, unsettled. Eleanor busied herself with household tasks to shake the feeling that something was amiss. As she folded the linens in the laundry room, she replayed Victor's expression in her mind. His smile, though small, carried a weight she couldn't place. What was it he wasn't saying? And why did it feel like he was observing her, as though he was waiting for something? Later that evening, as she prepared dinner in the immaculate kitchen, Eleanor overheard Victor's faint voice through the open door. He was speaking softly, almost as if to himself. She paused, straining to hear, but the words were too low to make out. The sound stopped abruptly when she entered the room with his tray. He looked up at her with that same knowing smile, his silence more piercing than any words. The unease followed her into the night. As she lay in bed, staring at the ornate ceiling, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that Victor knew more than he let on. The mansion's stillness seemed to press in on her, the weight of its secrets growing heavier with each passing hour. The following morning, Eleanor awoke to a gray sky and the soft patter of rain against the windows. She dressed in her usual modest attire and did her duties, her movements mechanical but efficient. She found Victor in the same place as always, sitting in his armchair by the window. Yet, there was a strange energy in the air, a subtle shift that made her more alert. As she poured his tea, Victor broke the silence. "Do you know why Gregory and Celeste leave you here, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice steady and almost conversational. Eleanor froze mid-pour, her heart skipping a beat. She forced a small smile, attempting to deflect. "Someone has to stay and look after you, Victor. They trust me to do that." Victor chuckled softly, the sound dry and brittle. "Trust you? That's an interesting way to put it." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Eleanor placed the teacup on the table beside him, her hands trembling slightly. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor leaned forward, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. "You're more than a caretaker, Eleanor. You're an observer. And sometimes, the things we see can be far more revealing than what we hear." She stared at him, her mind racing. What was he trying to say? Before she could press further, he leaned back in his chair, the moment slipping away as quickly as it had come. "The tea smells lovely," he remarked as though their conversation had never happened. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken as she left the room. Her thoughts swirled with doubt and suspicion. Over the past months, she had dismissed the strange behavior of Gregory and Celeste. The secretive phone calls, the hushed conversations, the locked office door. But Victor's words made her question everything. Was there more to their frequent absences than mere vacations? And what role was she playing in their carefully orchestrated life? That afternoon, while tidying Gregory's study, Eleanor's curiosity got the better of her. She noticed a stack of neatly arranged but not hidden papers on his desk. Her eyes landed on a sealed envelope bearing the logo of a prominent law firm. The label read, "Inheritance Documents, Confidential." Eleanor hesitated, her conscience battling with her curiosity. Finally, she slid the envelope open with trembling hands. The contents were dense with legal jargon, but one word caught her eye repeatedly: transfer. A chill ran down her spine as she pieced together the fragments. This wasn't just about inheritance, it was about control. As she replaced the documents, her heart pounded. Eleanor knew she was standing on the edge of a dangerous revelation. Whatever Gregory and Celeste were planning, they didn't want her to know. But now, she couldn't unsee the truth. The storm outside grew more substantial, the wind howling against the mansion's walls. Eleanor stared out the window, the rain blurring the world beyond. For the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of defiance. She couldn't keep ignoring the signs. Something was deeply wrong in the Harper family, and Victor, for all his frailty, seemed to be the only one willing to guide her toward the truth. That evening, the mansion was cloaked in darkness, the rainstorm battering the windows with unrelenting fury. Eleanor sat at the dining table, her dinner untouched. Across from her, Victor quietly sipped his soup, his movements deliberate. The silence between them felt charged, as if both were waiting for the other to break it. Finally, Victor set down his spoon and cleared his throat. "Eleanor," he began, his voice softer than usual, "you've always been kind to me, even when there was no reward. But kindness doesn't come without cost." Eleanor looked up, her brows furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, Victor?" He leaned back in his chair, his gaze piercing. "Gregory and Celeste, they've been plotting for years. Do you think they leave you here to care for me out of trust? No. It's because you're expendable to them, Eleanor. A convenient shield." Eleanor felt her stomach drop. A shield? For what? Victor hesitated as though weighing how much he should reveal. "You've seen the papers, haven't you? The ones in Gregory's study?" Her breath hitched. How could he know? She nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes. I didn't mean to, but I saw them." Victor sighed heavily. "Then you already know part of it. They've been trying to secure everything. My fortune, the properties, even this house. They've positioned themselves as my loving family, but it's all a performance. They think I'm too far gone to notice, but I see everything. And now, I need your help." Eleanor blinked, taken aback. "My help? What can I possibly do?" "You're the only person I trust," Victor said firmly. "They underestimate you, Eleanor. They see you as nothing more than a caretaker, someone they can control. That's your advantage. If we work together, We can stop them before it's too late." His words weighed heavily on her. Eleanor had always known Gregory and Celeste wasn't the loving family they pretended to be, but the depth of their betrayal left her shaken. She clenched her hands in her lap, her mind racing. Could she do this? Could she stand up to them? Before she could respond, Victor reached across the table and placed a small recorder in her hand. "Start with this," he said. "It has everything. Conversations, plans, their true intentions. But we need more. We need to build a case strong enough to expose them." Eleanor stared at the device, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a tiny act of rebellion, but a declaration of war. And the stakes were higher than she could have imagined. The following days were a whirlwind of secrecy and tension. Eleanor and Victor worked discreetly, careful not to arouse suspicion. Despite his frail appearance, Victor seemed reinvigorated, his sharp mind proving invaluable as they pieced together the puzzle of Gregory and Celeste's schemes. Eleanor began to notice patterns, small details that had once seemed inconsequential, but now took on new meaning. Celeste's hushed phone calls in the garden, the way Gregory always locked his office door, the cryptic conversations she overheard late at night. Each clue added to the growing picture of their betrayal. One afternoon, while dusting the bookshelves in Gregory's study, Eleanor found another envelope. This one contained a list of offshore accounts and financial transactions linked to Celeste's name. Her hands trembled as she realized the scope of their deception. They weren't just after Victor's inheritance. They had been siphoning funds for years, quietly building their empire while leaving him in the dark. Eleanor shared the discovery with Victor that evening. He nodded grimly, his jaw tightening. "This is worse than I thought," he muttered. "They've been planning this for longer than I realized. What do we do now?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor leaned forward, his eyes burning with determination. "We expose them. Publicly. But first, we need to ensure they can't retaliate. We'll transfer everything, the assets, the accounts, the properties, into a charitable foundation. They won't be able to touch a cent." Eleanor hesitated. "But won't they notice? Gregory especially. He's always so careful." Victor smiled faintly. "That's why we have to be smarter. He trusts that he has control over everything. We'll use that arrogance against him." The plan began to take shape. Victor summoned his trusted lawyer, Edward Blake, who has a reputation for integrity and discretion. When Edward arrived, he was initially skeptical of Eleanor's involvement. "Are you certain she can handle this?" he asked Victor. "She's why we're doing this," Victor replied firmly. "Without Eleanor, I would never have had the strength to act." Edward studied Eleanor for a moment before nodding. "Then let's get to work." The days that followed were grueling. Eleanor and Edward spent hours reviewing legal documents, ensuring every detail was airtight. Victor provided insight into his financial dealings, revealing assets Eleanor hadn't even known existed. Together, they formed an unlikely but formidable team, united by a common goal: to strip Gregory and Celeste of their power. As the plan progressed, Eleanor found herself growing more confident. She was no longer the quiet, submissive woman who had entered the Harper family years ago. Now, she was a force to be reckoned with, a woman determined to fight for justice for Victor and herself. As the days turned into weeks, the mansion became a battlefield disguised as an elegant home. Gregory and Celeste remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within their walls. Eleanor and Victor worked in the shadows, finalizing their plan to dismantle the web of lies that had ensnared them for so long. One morning, while organizing Victor's documents in the study, Eleanor stumbled upon a stack of letters tucked away in a drawer. These weren't legal documents or financial statements, but handwritten notes. Letters Victor had written to Gregory over the years, but never sent. In these letters, Victor had poured out his frustrations, his disappointments, and most heartbreakingly, his enduring hope that Gregory might one day change. Eleanor's chest tightened as she read through them. This wasn't just a fight for assets or justice, a fight for a man who had given everything to a family that had betrayed him at every turn. That evening, as Eleanor and Victor sat in the library's quiet, she handed him the letters. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy," she said softly, "but I found these." Victor's hands trembled as he took the papers, eyes scanning the familiar words. A heavy silence filled the room before he finally spoke. I wrote these during the darkest times, hoping that putting my thoughts on paper might ease the burden. But it never did. Gregory was always so distant. Eleanor hesitated, then said, "Victor, you can't blame yourself for his choices. You gave him everything a father could. The rest was up to him." Victor looked at her, his gaze filled with both gratitude and sorrow. "You're right, Eleanor. But it doesn't make it hurt any less." Their bond deepened in that moment, solidified by a shared understanding of betrayal and resilience. For Eleanor, Victor had become more than just someone she cared for. He symbolized her fight for freedom and dignity. The day arrived when the final documents were ready. The charitable foundation was officially established, and its structure was designed to ensure that every asset Victor owned, companies, properties, investments, was beyond Gregory and Celeste's reach. The foundation's mission was clear: to provide scholarships for underprivileged youth, fund community centers, and support medical research. It was a legacy that would outlive them all, transforming lives instead of feeding greed. Eleanor, now fully immersed in her role as Victor's ally, took charge of the foundation's operations. Edward Blake, the trusted lawyer, worked tirelessly to expedite the transfer of assets. Victor insisted that Eleanor be named president of the foundation, a role she hesitated to accept. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this kind of responsibility," she confessed one evening as they reviewed documents in the study. Victor placed a hand on hers. "You've been ready for a long time, Eleanor. You just didn't know it. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about giving you the power to shape your future." His words resonated deeply. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a sense of purpose, a vision for her life beyond the gilded cage of the Harper mansion. The final hurdle was Gregory and Celeste's return from Paris. They had no idea that the foundation existed, nor that their schemes had been uncovered. Eleanor and Victor knew that the confrontation would be inevitable and explosive. The night before their arrival, Victor called Eleanor to his side. "There's one last thing I need you to understand," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You may face their wrath. They'll say terrible things and accuse you of betrayal. But you must remember this: you are not their victim. You are their reckoning." Eleanor nodded, her resolve hardening. She had spent too long in their shadows, enduring their manipulation and scorn. The truth would finally come to light tomorrow, and she was ready to stand her ground. The day of Gregory and Celeste's return dawned with an eerie stillness. The mansion, usually a symbol of grandeur, felt like a stage set for a climactic performance. Eleanor stood at the window of the sitting room, watching as the black car pulled into the driveway. The air was thick with tension, her heart pounding in anticipation. Gregory exited the car first, his polished shoes clicking against the stone pathway, a smug smile on his face. Celeste followed, clad in an elegant coat and adorned with jewelry that gleamed in the sunlight. They looked every bit the picture of triumph, blissfully unaware of the storm awaiting them inside. Victor sat in his usual armchair, his posture straighter than it had been in years. His sharp eyes watched as the doors opened and Gregory entered the room. Celeste trailed behind, her usual air of superiority intact. "We're back," Gregory announced, his voice filled with self-satisfaction. "I hope you managed to keep everything in order while we were gone, Eleanor." Eleanor's stomach churned, but she forced a calm smile. "Everything is in order, Gregory. Victor and I have some news to share." Gregory raised an eyebrow, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. "News?" he asked, his tone growing cautious. Victor leaned forward, his frail hands clasped together. "Yes, Gregory. While you were indulging yourselves in Paris, Eleanor and I made some decisions. Decisions that will ensure this family's legacy is preserved, for the right reasons." Gregory's smile faltered. "What are you talking about, Dad?" Victor's gaze hardened. "I've transferred all my assets into a charitable foundation. Every penny, every property, every investment now belongs to the foundation. It will be used to help those in need, not to fund your selfish ambitions." The words hit Gregory like a slap. His face twisted in disbelief, then rage. "You did what?" he bellowed, stepping closer to Victor. "This is my inheritance. You can't just give it all away." Celeste gasped, her carefully composed expression breaking. Victor, you can't be serious. This is our family's wealth. What about Gregory's future? What about the sacrifices we've made? Victor's laugh was cold, bitter. Sacrifices? The only sacrifices I've seen are the ones Eleanor and I have made while you two indulged in your greed. Gregory's fury boiled over. This is her doing, isn't it? He shouted, pointing a finger at Eleanor. You've been manipulating him, poisoning him against us. Eleanor stood her ground, her voice steady. No, Gregory. I didn't have to manipulate anyone. Victor saw the truth on his own. The lies, the schemes, the way you've treated him like an obstacle instead of a father. You did this to yourself. Gregory's face turned red with anger, but before he could retort, Victor raised his hand. Enough, he commanded, his voice firm despite his age. I have evidence of your betrayal, recordings, documents, everything. If you try to contest this, I will make sure the world knows the truth about you both. Victor reached for a folder on the table and opened it, revealing a stack of papers. He pulled out a recorder and pressed play. Gregory and Celeste's voices filled the room, their greed and disdain laid bare. The evidence was undeniable. Celeste's face paled as the recording played, her hands trembling. Gregory, however, refused to back down. You think this will stop me? He sneered. I'll fight this. I'll take you to court if I have to. Victor's expression didn't waver. You're welcome to try, Gregory. But the foundation structure is ironclad. You'll find that you have no legal grounds to stand on. The tension in the room was palpable as Gregory paced back and forth, his mind racing for a way out. Celeste, meanwhile, sank onto the sofa, her bravado crumbling. Victor, she said, trembling, we're your family. How can you do this to us? Victor's gaze softened, but only for a moment. Family? A family doesn't scheme behind each other's backs. A family doesn't steal from one another. I raised you, Gregory, and gave you every opportunity to be better than this. But you chose greed over loyalty. Eleanor watched as Gregory's confidence wavered. She saw a flicker of vulnerability in him for the first time. A man whose entire world had just crumbled. Pack your things, Victor said firmly. You have 1 week to leave this house. You'll receive a modest pension, enough to live a decent life. But you'll no longer profit from my name or my legacy. Gregory's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew he was defeated. Celeste opened her mouth to protest, but Victor silenced her with a glance. As Gregory and Celeste left the room, murmuring threats under their breath, Eleanor felt relief wash over her. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel suffocating. It felt lighter, like the weight of their manipulation had finally been lifted. Victor turned to Eleanor, his expression weary but resolute. It's done, he said. They're gone. Eleanor nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. It's just the beginning, Victor. Now we can build something real. Together, they looked around the room, their shared determination filling the space. The battle had been won, but the work was far from over. They had a legacy to rebuild, founded on integrity, purpose, and hope. The mansion was unrecognizable within weeks. What was once a hollow monument to wealth and power now pulsed with life and purpose. The transformation began with small but symbolic changes, removing Celeste's towering portraits and replacing them with vibrant artwork from local communities. The once impenetrable iron gates welcomed visitors, marking the Harper Estate's new identity as the Victor Harper Foundation headquarters. Eleanor, now the foundation's president, embraced her role with determination and humility. She walked through the mansion's bustling halls every morning, greeting the newly hired staff. The air was filled with a sense of renewal, like the house had shed its oppressive past. Victor, no longer confined to his armchair, found solace in the foundation's mission. Though his health remained fragile, his mind was sharper than ever. He spent his days mentoring young professionals, sharing lessons from a lifetime of triumphs and mistakes. If my story can inspire just one person to choose integrity over greed, then all of this will have been worth it, he told Eleanor one afternoon as they reviewed scholarship applications together. The foundation's initiatives quickly gained traction. Scholarships for underprivileged students, Funding for community centers and grants for small businesses began to make tangible differences in people's lives. Local newspapers featured stories of the foundation's impact, and letters of gratitude poured in daily. One morning, as Eleanor walked through the garden, a space she had once viewed as a symbol of isolation, she noticed a young girl sketching near the fountain. The girl was one of the scholarship recipients, a promising artist whose talent had gone unnoticed until the foundation's program supported her education. Eleanor paused, watching the girl's pencil dance across the paper, and felt a swell of pride. This is what it's all about, she thought, her heart full. The mansion was no longer a prison. It was a place of transformation. Despite the foundation's success, the shadows of Gregory and Celeste loomed. True to their threats, they attempted to challenge the asset transfers in court. Gregory hired an aggressive legal team, determined to reclaim what he saw as rightfully his. The tension mounted as Eleanor and Victor prepared for the inevitable confrontation in the courtroom. Edward Blake, the foundation's trusted lawyer, was a pillar of confidence. The foundation's structure is airtight, he assured them during a strategy meeting. Gregory and Celeste have no legal grounds to contest it. Their case is based on entitlement, not evidence. Still, Eleanor couldn't shake the anxiety that came with the looming trial. She pored over legal documents late into the night, her determination growing with every page. She knew the stakes were higher than just the foundation. This was about standing up to years of manipulation and reclaiming her power. The day of the hearing arrived with a chill in the air. Gregory and Celeste entered the courtroom with their usual arrogance, their lawyer spinning a tale of betrayal and deceit. They painted Eleanor as an opportunist who had manipulated Victor into making the transfers, a narrative crafted to sway public opinion. Eleanor, dressed in a simple yet elegant blazer, took the stand with calm resolve. She spoke clearly and passionately, detailing the years of neglect and betrayal she had endured. This foundation isn't about revenge, she said, her voice steady. It's about building something meaningful from the ashes of greed. Victor made these decisions because he believed in a better future, not for himself but for others. Victor's testimony was equally powerful. Despite his frailty, he spoke with unwavering conviction. I may have been blind to Gregory and Celeste's actions for too long, he admitted. But this foundation is my redemption. It is my way of ensuring that my mistakes don't define my legacy. The recordings of Gregory and Celeste's conversations played before the court sealed the case. Their voices, dripping with disdain and entitlement, laid bare their true intentions. The judge's decision was swift and decisive. The foundation's legitimacy was upheld, and Gregory and Celeste were left with nothing but their modest pensions. As they left the courtroom, Eleanor felt relief and triumph. Gregory's glare burned into her back, but she didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. Eleanor and Victor focused on the foundation's mission and the courtroom battle behind them. The Harper Mansion, now a beacon of hope, became a hub of activity. The grand halls that once echoed with silence and tension were now filled with voices of collaboration and progress. Eleanor approached her new role with a renewed sense of purpose. She regularly met with her growing team, ensuring every initiative reflected the foundation's integrity, opportunity, and compassion values. Grants for small businesses flourished, and community centers received the funding needed to provide essential services. The scholarship program gained national attention, allowing disadvantaged youth to dream bigger. Victor, despite his age and declining health, remained deeply involved. He spent his mornings mentoring scholarship recipients and his afternoons dictating his memoirs to a young writer hired by the foundation. People need to understand the importance of choices, he told Eleanor one evening. Not just the big ones, but the small ones too. They're the foundation of who we become. One of the foundation's most transformative projects was the Art for All initiative, inspired by the young girl Eleanor had seen sketching in the garden. The program offered art supplies, workshops, and gallery space to budding artists who lacked resources. The first exhibition drew hundreds of visitors, with Eleanor personally hosting the event. Walking through the gallery, Eleanor was approached by a middle-aged man who introduced himself as a former factory worker. Thanks to the foundation's scholarship, his daughter, now a college student, had painted one of the displayed pieces. "You've changed our lives," he said, tears in his eyes. For the first time, my daughter believes she can have a future. Moments like this fueled Eleanor's determination. The foundation was no longer just Victor's redemption or her escape. It was a living testament to the power of resilience and generosity. Victor's health began to deteriorate in the months that followed. Eleanor stayed by his side, managing the foundation while ensuring his comfort. Despite his physical decline, Victor's mind remained sharp, and his pride in Eleanor's leadership was evident. "You've done more than I ever could have imagined," he said one evening, his voice weak but filled with emotion. "You've made this family name mean something again." The loss was profound when Victor passed away on a crisp autumn morning. His funeral, held in the mansion's garden, was attended by hundreds whose lives he had touched through the foundation. As Eleanor stood before the crowd to deliver a eulogy, she spoke not of his wealth or accomplishments, but his transformation. "Victor Harper taught me that it's never too late to change, to make amends and leave the world better than you found it. His legacy isn't in the riches he once possessed, but in the lives he helped build." In the weeks after his passing, Eleanor felt the weight of both grief and responsibility. She poured herself into her work, channeling her emotions into expanding the foundation's reach. She partnered with other organizations, leveraging the Harper name to create lasting change. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, became a community landmark. Its doors were always open, hosting events, workshops, and fundraisers. Eleanor's leadership earned her widespread recognition, and she became a sought-after speaker, sharing her story of resilience and transformation. One evening, as the sun set over the garden, Eleanor found herself alone in the office. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small, framed photo of Victor and herself at the foundation's launch. She traced the edges of the frame, her heart heavy but full. She allowed herself to pause and reflect for the first time in years. She wasn't just the woman who had survived the Harper's betrayal. She was the woman who had turned it into something beautiful. Her journey had been one of pain, sacrifice, and growth, but it had brought her to a place of purpose. Stepping outside, she looked up at the stars, feeling a sense of peace. The past was behind her, but its lessons would guide her always. And as she gazed at the vibrant life around the mansion, she knew one thing for sure. The best chapters of her story were yet to come.